We got about 6 inches of snow that day, and so I took some pictures and shared some of them on Facebook. And here's one of the pictures that I shared. Yeah, we got about 6 inches of snow, and so here's hoping that we get that kind of snow here in 2020, right? I mean, one can only hope. But it was on a snowy day like that in northern Ohio that this story unfolds and a life-changing revelation came. He fell to his knees in the snow that day and remembered a memory verse he had learned at Sunday school. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. As a child, he had learned the story. As a teen, he had scoffed at it. And as an adult, well, he had dismissed it as the stuff that fairy tales are made of. But now, on his knees in the snow, he was coming face to face with its truth for the very first time. But I must go back 2.5 hours or so and tell you more about the man that I've introduced you to for this story to make sense. He was mostly a decent man, though somewhat of a Scrooge, and he was unkind at times, but upright in most of his dealings with people. But he just didn't really like people, and well, he didn't like church, and well, he didn't believe all that incarnation story stuff that churches talked about and proclaimed. How could God become so near, so available, so close to man? How could he make himself available? How could he, if this God existed, was he really near? Did he really concern himself with mankind? Was he really, really available to people? If there was a God, this man thought, he was only watching us from a distance. So on that Sunday morning, as his family got ready for church, they got dressed without him. At his wife's usual invitation, he shook his head and settled into his chair near the crackling fire with the daily paper. The snow was coming down lightly as he began to read, and as he finished the sports section, he noticed that the snow was coming down faster and heavier, and so he quickly checked the forecast on his phone and realized that they were predicted to get a whopping 10 inches of snow in the next 2 hours. Well, he knew his family was safe at church, so he didn't worry about them, and he continued to read his paper. But as he was reading, he heard a thump, a thudding sound, and then another, and then another. Well, it was sort of a thud and a thump. And, well, at first he thought that the neighborhood kids are out, they're enjoying the fresh snow, and they're throwing snowballs at my house. He jumped out of his chair and ran to his window, looked around, and to his surprise, he saw nothing. He shrugged his shoulders, went back to his chair, started his reading again, and he heard the noise again. Thud, thump, thud, thump. He tossed his paper aside and disgustingly and ran back to the window, expecting that he would see the culprits this time. But again, there was no one. And that's when his gaze looked downward and he saw it. It was about a dozen or so black-caped chickadees huddled in the snow, miserably shaking. They had been caught in the storm, and in desperation, searching for some type of shelter, they had flown into his large landscape window, looking for a warm place to find shelter. Well, he was a Scrooge, but he couldn't just let those birds lie there and freeze. And so he thought about his warm barn, and he thought, well, you know what? That'd be a suitable shelter for these birds. And so on went his coat and his boots and his hat and his gloves, and out the door he went. He flung open his barn doors, and he figured food would entice him, and so he scattered breadcrumbs from close to where the birds were at toward the barn door, to the opening, the warm lighted space there. And but to his dismay, the birds didn't move. So he tried catching them, and well, they scattered everywhere. And then he tried shooing them toward the barn, but they scattered in every direction except in the direction of the barn and that warm lighted space. It was then that he realized that they were afraid of him. And so he thought to himself, I'm a strange, terrible looking creature, but if only I could let them know that I'm trying to help them and that I don't mean them any harm. I'm trying to bring them to safety. He said to himself, but how can I make these birds realize that I am their Savior, I am their help? Every move I make frightens them. They will just follow me. If they would just follow me to safety, I could help them, but they won't let me lead them. I can't shoo them in. Food won't entice them. You know, if only I could become a bird, he thought. I could mingle with them. I could talk to them in their language, and I could lead them to warmth and safety. But it would only happen if I could become one of them. And that's when the revelation came. It hit him so hard, and it sounded so clearly in his soul that it sounded like thunder. This is what God did. He became one of us. He shouted out loud. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And this man went to his knees as the snow was ending and the chickadees flew away. They had served their purpose and delivered the message well. God came near and made Himself available. Last month, Frank Jordan taught us about how we had this great opportunity that we can build meaningful relationships with people the Jesus way. And over the next 4 months, we're going to learn 4 different ways that Jesus built these meaningful relationships. And tonight we will discuss that first way. The first way is Jesus was available. So I want to introduce you real quickly to some of the characters that we find in the narrative of the first 4 chapters of the Gospel of John. We have John the Baptist. We have the disciples Andrew, John, Peter, Philip, and Nathaniel. We have those at the wedding in Cana. Of course, the bride and the groom and their families, and those invited to the wedding, which included Jesus and His mother and His disciples. There's a man named Nicodemus. There's a Samaritan woman at the well in Sychar, and those Samaritans who lived there who came to see Jesus at her invitation. And there's the nobleman who came to Jesus whose son was near death. From these 4 chapters and Jesus' interaction with these people, we can learn 4 different ways that Jesus made Himself available. And these are the ways that we can become available to people around us. First of all, go where people are. Well, I know this may seem and sound elementary, but I have never met someone God wanted me to meet by avoiding people. People are the point. We build meaningful relationships like Jesus when we go where people are. I know we can use social media to proclaim the gospel and share the light of the gospel, and really it's a great tool. But what I'm talking about here, what I'm meaning is really go where people are. It's this face-to-face interaction that I'm talking about here. Jesus went to where John was baptizing, and there He recruited His disciples. He went to weddings. He went to the temple. He didn't sit in an empty building waiting for people to come to Him. He went where they were. And we will never meet the people God wants us to meet until we go where people are. Over the last few weeks, I've heard stories of people meeting people God wanted them to meet at gas stations, laundromats, restaurants, Walmart, work, on vacation, on airline flights. A young man witnessed to a lady as he pumped gas at a gas station. Mark Batterson tells the true story of a man who used a plane ride to save the life of an unborn child and redirect the misled life of a pregnant teen. She had stolen her father's credit card, booked a flight to a city where she was going to get an abortion. But after her conversation with this man, they landed the flight. She called her parents, and she booked another flight home and reconciled with her family. I know of 2 couples from New Life Church who went to a local restaurant by chance, or so they thought, but it turned out to be a supernatural synchronicity, a divine date. They were waited on by someone there who now attends faithfully their small group. Go where people are and pray for God to lead you to someone who needs Him. The second way that we can make ourselves available is wherever you are, be all there. This is a quote from missionary Jim Elliot, and I have this quote in the margin of my Bible at Genesis chapter 39, verse 20. The context of this verse is that Joseph has been put in prison for the second time. But instead of curling up in the corner of the prison cell, he met people. He must have reasoned, well, I've got a captive audience here. And so he went out and he met people. He became a leader in the prison. He met those he needed to meet because he was fully present in the prison and God was with him. This is what Genesis 39:20 says. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. Did you catch that? He was in the prison and he was there. He was physically available, but not only just physically, he was emotionally and intellectually and spiritually available as well. His whole person was there. What circumstance are you in right now that if you will be there in that circumstance and let God be with you, God can use the situation that you're in, that circumstance, He can use that to help you to reach somebody else. Don't let the distractions of life keep you from being with the people you are with. If you will pay attention, you will be able to minister to those around you and build meaningful relationships the way Jesus did. Go where people are, and wherever you are, be all there. The third way that Jesus made Himself available is that He went to the outcast. And so the way we can be available is we can go to outcasts as well. John wrote the following about Jesus' travel plans. He left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. Travel through Samaria was not geographically necessary, and it certainly wasn't what Jews would normally do. They would normally travel up the east side of the Jordan to avoid going through Samaria. But this trip to Sychar was directed by the divine will of God. He needed to go through Samaria to Sychar to meet the outcast woman who other people avoided. When we purposely reach out to those that society avoids, we are building meaningful relationships the Jesus way. There's nothing too dirty that He can't make worthy. This lady left clean, washed in His mercy, and the whole town was changed because Jesus went to the outcasts. Just a few days ago, I heard of a young man, a young teenager, who made up in his mind that he was going to be used by God to reach someone at his school. He felt to sit at a certain table in the lunchroom where no one else in their right mind would. This was where a certain segment of the student body sat, where most sane people, they avoided that table. He was mocked and ridiculed by those who sat there. But day after day, he would rush to that table with his Bible in his hand. And finally, one day it happened. One of those outcasts said to him, "What you reading there, preacher?" And that young man started holding a Bible study in a band practice room for week after week and touched no telling how many lives because he was willing to go to the outcasts. When you and I go where people are, wherever we are all there, And when we go to the outcasts, something wonderful begins to happen in our lives. Others will come to us. This is the fourth way that we can become available. Reach those or receive those who come to us. People were talking about Jesus, and Nicodemus heard what they were saying about him. They were talking about his teaching. They were talking about the disciples he was choosing, about the miracle at the wedding of Cana, and about his strong words and his bold actions in the temple. The light shines in the darkness, John wrote, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus' light shined in the darkness, so much so that Nicodemus came to him under the cover of darkness, but it was the light that Jesus was shining that gave Nicodemus the ability to see the way to Jesus. People will come to you with spiritual questions, and God will use you to guide them if you'll make yourself available. Not only did Nicodemus come to Jesus in John chapter 3, but at the close of John chapter 4, a nobleman whose son was near death came to Jesus and received a miracle. God will use you to build meaningful relationships if you will receive those who come to you with questions and life situations they cannot handle by themselves. He will use you to declare truth to them. He will use you to bring deliverance. He will use you to bring healing and to bring hope to these people. We can build meaningful relationships by being available. And we make ourselves available by going where people are, by wherever we are, being all there, by going to the outcasts, and by receiving those that God brings to us. The story didn't end that day with the man on his knees in the snow. Realizing that God made himself available to humanity changed that man. And from that day to the day of his death, he made himself available to his family, to his neighbors, to his co-workers, to his community, and to his church. He built meaningful relationships that changed the lives of others. That small town was forever different and forever better because two men made themselves available, Jesus and a reformed Scrooge. For New Life Church, 2020 holds the promise of many lives changed, many lives rescued, many lives healed because we make ourselves available. I hope you enjoy your discussion time. God bless you.